So welcome everybody to Gita from Zero, session number 8. So today, number 8, we are going to discuss Hinduism in relationship to Bhagavad Gita. The idea that we have been going with in our explanation of the Bhagavad Gita is, before we start with going chapter to chapter in Bhagavad Gita, I'm trying to help people not only here in this room, but people on YouTube and in the internet who watch this in a larger, setting, in the setting of YouTube, for them to understand what's the background of Bhagavad Gita. And many people do not come from India and have no concept. Even people who come from India have many wrong concepts about things. So this is the reason why I'm doing this preface to Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada at one point mentioned the fact that in his introduction to Bhagavad Gita, that a medicine has to be understood according to the direction of the doctor who's giving it. You can't just take some arbitrary medicine. You have to have some prescription, and it has to be done in a certain way. All these kinds of things are there. So in a similar way, we are trying to understand Gita the way the Gita presents itself, which is what Prabhupada meant when he used the words "as it is" in his naming of his Bhagavad Gita. It isn't just Bhagavad Gita, but it's Bhagavad Gita as it is. So Hinduism is a blurry concept, and I thought that it required to talk a little bit about that so that we can clear up any things that might come up later on in our discussions of Bhagavad Gita. So this is number 8 in Gita from Zero, and this is going to be the usual misconceptions. From the Western world, many people immediately have certain particular misconceptions when the word Hinduism is mentioned. And so we'll talk about that today. These are our list of 4 things that we're going to discuss. We'll have a Gita excerpt, because although I'm prefixing Bhagavad Gita, I'm preceding Bhagavad Gita with this long introduction, I am also going to have a little tiny bit of Bhagavad Gita in there, just so that we're actually talking about the Bhagavad Gita to some extent in each session. And I'm pulling an excerpt from the Bhagavad Gita, which will be, kind of germane to the session that we're discussing. So we'll have a Gita excerpt. We're going to talk about many gods and the white light. Most people, when they think about Hinduism, they think in terms that people in India worship many gods, or alternatively, some think that there is one Brahman, a supreme being, a being that has no form, no shape, that's eternal, all-pervading, and is a very large manifestation of effulgence. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about Dharma, Varnashram Dharma, and the caste system. That's another common misconception. And the commonly stated objection to Hinduism, it's their karma. So this will be what we'll discuss today. And I'll go through a little bit, then we can discuss, and then I'll go through a little bit more, and we can discuss again. So here is our text for today. Chaturvarnyam mayam shrishtam guna karma vibhagasha tasya kartaram apimam vidi akartaram avyayam. So this is from 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It's the 13th verse. According to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society were created by me. Although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So, Chaturvarnya, so Varna means classification or category. Chatur is 4. So there's 4 categories. And the Varnashram system is usually understood to be, the Brahmana class, the Kshatriya class. The Brahmana class are the teachers, the intellectuals, the writers, the people who form policy. Then the Kshatriyas are the warriors, the administrators, the kings, etc. Then we have the Vaishyas, who are the mercantile class. They're the ones that produce everything that's necessary for society. And finally, we have the Shudras, who fill in all the whatever else needs to be done in human society. So what's key here is that Krishna is saying he creates this system, which outside of India is usually spoken of as the caste system. And most people look down on India for embracing this concept of the caste system. But Krishna in Bhagavad Gita is saying that he created the caste system. However, there's a key point here, and that is guna karma vibhagasha. So vibhagasha is in various kinds of divisions. So guna means quality and karma means work. We notice that the word janma, which means birth, is not in this verse. So the concept of Bhagavad Gita saying that a person is a kshatriya because he's been born in a kshatriya family, or is a sudra because he's been born in a sudra family, or a brahmana because he's been born in a brahmana family, is not the original system that Krishna established. In fact, Krishna is establishing a system based on quality and work, guna and karma. So if a person does the work, has the qualities of a kshatriya, they should be accepted as a kshatriya, regardless of what birth they may have taken from wherever. All right, so let me ask if there are any questions here about that. And if so, we'll discuss them. If not, we'll move on. This is a chosen verse right from Bhagavad Gita because I'm going to be making more points about this particular concept of the Varnashram Dharma and what Dharma actually means. So let's move on to the next. So right away, when we talk about Hinduism, we have a problem because Hinduism doesn't mean anything really. The word Hindu does not appear in the Vedas anywhere. So Hinduism is not a Vedic concept. There's no concept of Hindu in the Vedic literature. It's like, I use the analogy of in Abrahamic religions, we have, or at least in the Western religious tradition, we have this idea of talking about something called the Abrahamic religions. Now, Abrahamic religions means the Judaism, it means Christianity, and it means Islam. Those are three religions, and they're based on the Old Testament to some extent or another, and particularly a person who is named Abraham. So they're called the Abrahamic religions. But few people would argue that there is such a thing as Abrahamic religion. It's actually an umbrella term. It encompasses several religions. So Christianity is different from Islam. Islam is different from Judaism. They're different religions, but they have an overall classification or an umbrella term, which we call the Abrahamic religions. And so in a similar way, this is what Hinduism is. Hinduism is not one thing, it's many things. And Hinduism is an umbrella term that encompasses 4, 5, or as many as you want to go out, depending on how broad your concept of Hinduism is. Then it encompasses all these different religions with different purposes, different teachers, and different methods. The reason there is such a thing, and there is such a concept as Hindu, is that at one time, the Arabic people who lived on the western side of the Sindhu River, also known as the Indus River, sometimes also known, as far as I know, as the Sarasvati River. So we have this one body of water And people who lived on the west of it called people who lived on the eastern banks of it the Sindhus, because they lived on the other side of the river, the Sindhu River. But in the dialect of the Middle Easterners, Sindhu became Hindu as a phonetic change. So by the way people speak, one letter becomes a different letter. So Sindhu became Hindu. This was how the word entered into everyday use. Of course, it never became very popular until there was a push to try to eliminate the ruling order of the British in India. At that point, the Indian political groups wanted to unify. And so they unified by addressing themselves as Hindus, because some were Shaivites, some were Vaiṣṇavas, some were Advaita Vedantans, some were, one thing and another thing. But they felt that if they could all see a commonality of being Hindus, then they would have the strength to remove the British from their political control. And so Hindu then, from being a misnomer that was kind of used by mostly Middle Easterners, Hindu became propelled into being an overall concept, and a political concept at that. Though it does not indicate a particular philosophy, it doesn't indicate a particular way of living or anything else, it is an umbrella term. So someone who's a Hindu can think and believe many different things. So right away I wanted to start with this basic misconception that there is such a thing as a Hindu in one sense, because some people define anything in India, any kind of religion in India, except for maybe Islam, as a type of Hinduism. So we can go all that route, and even then Jainism and Buddhism can be thought of in one sense, although generally Buddhism is considered its own separate religion, and generally Jainism is also considered its own separate religion. And so these other things can also be put under that umbrella or not, depending on how wide you want to get. Any questions or comments about that part? Okay. So usually when people think of the religion of India or Hinduism, which of course Bhagavad Gita is a very, very important literature in India. The first thing that comes to at least Western people's minds is this idea of many gods, that in India people worship many gods, and indeed that's true. But there are different kinds of God worship, and here I'm mentioning a few of them. We have polytheism, which is worshiping different gods. Primarily people in India, they worship generally either Vishnu or Shiva, or they worship Shakti, or Shiva's wife. And so Durga worship is a prominent thing in some parts of India. And it has its own set of standards, its own traditions, it has its own temples, it has its own history and culture. So, and similarly, Shaivism, or worshiping Shiva, has its own culture and tradition. And in this way, the central being of Vaiṣṇavism is Vishnu or Krishna. The central being of Shaivism is Shiva. The central being of Shakta worship, or Shaktism as it's sometimes called, is Durga. There are sometimes people who worship Brahma, but not very much in India. It does occur occasionally, but it's not a very big thing. And there are people who worship other demigods too. Ganesh, they worship Surya, they worship Indra, etc. These are all part of a huge pantheon of what we call demigods. And the word is important there. Demi means half or partial, and God means that they are not on the same level as the Supreme Being, which is Krishna or Vishnu. So Krishna is the Supreme Being, and he says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Adir Hi Devanam. So he's saying he's the source of all the demigods. And he also says, Mata Parataram Nanyat, that there is nothing above me. And he also says that everything comes from me, so that the Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo Mata Sarvam Pravartate. So he is describing himself in Bhagavad Gita as the Supreme Being. So this is the way that people may misunderstand or misinterpret what's going on by assuming that Bhagavad Gita teaches polytheism. As a matter of fact, in chapter 7 and in chapter 9, Krishna talks against the idea of worshiping different demigods. We can worship various demigods, but we will get material benefits from them only. We will not get the real goal of life. And Krishna cautions against that. And this is, we've talked a little bit about, we've brushed a little bit on Vaiṣṇavism, which is the worship of Vishnu as the Supreme Being. We've talked a little bit about Shaivism as worshiping Shiva as the Supreme Being. And we've talked a little bit about Durga worship or Shakta worship, which is worshiping Devi or the goddess as the material nature, the material energy, worshiping her as the Supreme Being. And we have another possibility, and that is what's known as Advaita Vedanta. So Advaita Vedanta doesn't worship any of these. Well, actually, in one sense they do, but they have this understanding that these various demigods are only emanations of a formless one that pervades the entire universe. And this is known as Brahman, or a lot of other different names are used. So this is a different kind of worship. This is not really worshiping Vishnu, it's not worshiping Shiva, it's not worshiping Devi, it's worshiping Brahman. And one tries to worship Brahman by merging with Brahman. And this is the fourth basic branch of Hinduism. And people who do this, they have a very different set of goals, a very different group of temples, they have a very different culture, they have very different practices too. So from a Western point of view, now we've seen polytheistic worship. We've seen monotheistic worship. We've talked about this worship of the impersonal. And then we have people who worship the material world, not Devi, not the Brahman, but the material universe. Now, this gets into where we're starting to see how Western conceptions of God are seen and carried out. So in the Western world, people tend to, if they think about God, they think about God as being one with the universe. Some cases, people have this concept that's known as Deism, which at one time was very popular, but it's now kind of faded. And Deism is the conception that there is a God, and he creates the universe, but after he creates the universe, it's hands off. He doesn't do anything more after that. The universe runs by its own laws. Humanism is the idea that we worship all human beings as a manifestation of God, and so then serving humans is the same as serving God. Of course, we have atheism, which is worshiping no God. No God exists, there's no reason to worship God. And then we have what I'm calling polymorphic monotheism. Satyaraj has a better term for this, but we worship one being, which is Krishna, but Krishna is manifest in a multiplicity of forms. So he can come as Krishna, he can come as Vishnu, he can come as Ramachandra, he can come as Kurma or Matsya, Nrsingadev, as Vamandev. There are a number of different forms. They are all the same being, but that same being is coming in a different, apparently external package, and also sometimes with a different mood and mission. So that's there. And at the very bottom we can mention the idea of Spiritism. Spiritism is usually the worship of disincarnate beings, like ghosts and various other non-incarnated entities. So this is kind of, from a Western perspective, the various concepts and the tradition of Hinduism does touch on some of these. In Hinduism, we'll see examples of polytheism. We'll see people who worship in a monotheistic way. We'll see people who worship the Brahman. Pantheism is there. Deism is not. Humanism is not really. Atheism, there are certain aspects or certain versions of the Vedas which even are atheistic in their tint. Those are not accepted interpolations or explanations of the Vedas, but they're there. And then what we would characterize our Vaishnava tradition is polymorphic monotheism, that we believe in one God, but that God can come in many forms. And then usually we have people who worship spirits and ghosts and other such beings. And this gets into the agori, or the left-handed path. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Questions about that part? Can you, just a second, he'll hold it for you.
Yes, Maharaj, pantheism is the same as worshipping the Vishwarup as a material form. Would it be same or different?
It's roughly the same. In 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that there are, what he calls the Mahatmas, and they understand Krishna as God. And the Mahatmas, they serve Krishna, and they're clear about what they're doing. They're doing devotional service without motivation, etc. Now, then he says there are the Sukratinas. The Sukratinas are, the one who is suffering, the distress, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and then the jnani. So we have those four. They are, at least they have a sense that God is a being and they're trying to connect with God, but they still have material motivations. Then beneath them, we find that there are 3 other categories. And one of those is the Ekatma, the one who worships the one, which is equivalent to Advaita Brahman, the one without a second. Then we have the something Bahu something. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Sometimes I get stuck. What happened there? Oh, everything disappeared. Okay, so. Okay, so now we'll go to Bhagavad Gita 9:15, I believe, is where we need to be. Ekat vena pritak vena bahuda vishvato mukham. So there it is. So we have the Ekat Vena is the one who worships the Brahman. The Pritak Vena, Bahuda, is the one that worships many gods, which we see as polytheism. And finally, we have the Vishvatamukham. So Vishvatamukham are what we have in the category of pantheism, Oh, Hare Krishna, welcome. So this is the kind of way that Bhagavad Gita breaks down various kinds of worship. So the difference, there is actually in one sense the what we call the Vishvarup. But the Vishvarup is a very technical, and I'm not aware that anybody worships the Vishvarup per se. They worship either in a pantheistic way, the entire nature of the material universe, or they may worship in a Mayavad way of the Brahman, but the Vishvarup, or not the Vishvarup, but the universal form, that one, in one sense, is Krishna manifesting as everything simultaneously, which Arjuna saw, which was a very bewildering form, So Krishna is expanding out in so many places. But the way that usually gets thought about is as nature, worshiping God as nature. So these are, as I say, these are different types of worship, and most people are under the misconception that Hinduism or the Vedic tradition is all polytheistic, that we worship various different demigods. We agree that there are various demigods. We don't specifically worship them. We worship the one supreme being, and that one supreme being is expanded in many different forms, and there are many different names with still that person is one person, so he's expanded in many forms, and he is not the demigods, he's way above the demigods. Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Thank you for it.
Hare Krishna. All right, so right away, when we're discussing this idea of Bhagavad Gita and understanding it properly, many people, from the perspective of seeing Hinduism as a religion and thinking of it that way, approaching Bhagavad Gita with this idea that the Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu scripture, then they will see this concept over and over again, the white light, the Brahman. So sometimes it's called the Brahman, the white light, the all one, Advaita, Mayavada, impersonal absolute, foundation of existence, the unmoved mover, the source, all these things. Here we see in all of its glorious detail. It's just a plain, undifferentiated sheet of effulgence with no changing, no color, no form, no differentiation of any kind. And this is, by many people, understood to be the source of everything. And oftentimes, especially if you meet Bhagavad Gita, or you meet the idea of the Vedic tradition or Hinduism in a college setting, they will assume that this is the bottom line, that what we want to do is to understand this one source of everything, and this one source of everything, and by doing so, we will either live in harmony with it or try to merge with it. And this is not at all what Bhagavad Gita is recommending. However, we'll discuss that very soon. So we usually think of this white light as the effulgence of the Supreme, of Krishna. So Krishna is a person, and from Krishna's body comes an effulgence, and this effulgence is an intense light, and that intense light is actually tiny souls, spirit souls like you and me, that are emanating from it, just like particles of light or photons come from the sun. So from Krishna come dazzling white particles of consciousness. And you can attempt to merge with this white light although this is not really recommended in Bhagavad Gita. It's possible, but it's not recommended, nor is it eternal. So people who want to do this, we usually call them Advaitins, or we call this process Advaita Vedanta. And people who forego the personal form of God are usually called Mayavadis, and they believe something called Mayavada. So they understand that everything comes from the impersonal absolute. From Western history, and also Eastern history of India, we have this concept that everything must come from one thing, which is certainly true. Krishna is the source of everything. He says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo. Everything comes from me. So Krishna is saying that. Everything, prabhava, means to emanate. So everything comes from him. But the distinction is, in Bhagavad Gita, we will learn that everything comes from his personal form. And the white light certainly is the generation of the world that we live in, the material world. So we have from Krishna's effulgence, the Brahman, it becomes reduced and becomes what's known as the pradhan in the material world, which is the material energy but non-differentiated. And then it becomes the Mahatat, and the Mahatat then differentiates and creates the planets, the stars, the world we walk around in, all this. So this is how the white light eventually cascades down and becomes the material world. So Krishna is the original source, and he's the source of the Brahman, and the Brahman is the source of what's called the Pradhan. And the Pradhan, when it becomes agitated, becomes the source of the material cosmos. So this is actually what's being described in the Bhagavad Gita. And in Western philosophy, people referred to it as the unmoved mover, the source, the foundation of existence. And these things are true, but it is the source of the material existence, whereas the living entities have a higher source. And there's a existence, a category of things above, which we call the spiritual world. Questions about that? Yes.
Prabhuji, is this the same light that when we meditate between the eyebrows is the same light?
Yes, yes. So there's a number of different ways people use to connect with this Brahman. Some do it by meditation, some by thinking, some try to do it through the Kundalini, some do it through some kind of austerity. So there are all these different techniques. But what they don't understand is that this merging with the white light is not satisfying for the living entity. We certainly become relieved of all material suffering. However, we do not experience any activity, because if you're merged in the white light, that's your reality. Imagine being surrounded by white on every side, and you don't have a body either. You're just lost in this white, and you can't wait till next Thursday, because nothing's going to happen. There's no time. Nothing's going to change. It's going to stay like that forever. And therefore, in Bhagavatam, it explains that ye nye ravindaksha vimukta maninas, that people come out of the white light, because essentially it's boring. The living entity wants rasa, wants some kind of relationship, and the living entity wants to engage in activity or lila. So there's no real developed rasa or lila in the Brahman. So we cannot stay there. We are individuals. But if we come out and engage in rasa in the material world, we will be again subjected to all the problems of the material world. We don't want to be subjected to the material world problems. We want to go to the spiritual world. Okay, so any other questions about this? So we've already talked about this. So Krishna explained the Varnashram system. We saw that verse that we started off with in the 4th chapter. And so the Varnashram system is not the same as the caste system. There are different occupations. And there are also 4 spiritual orders, which we have not mentioned. And whether we want to believe it or not, this system exists. The question is this system working harmoniously? In every culture, in every time, in every group of humans, there will be people who will be teachers, thinkers, intellectuals. There will be people who are warriors, administrators, organizers. There will be people who are good with money, agriculture, and, those kind of things. And then there'll be people who just do service or labor, and they aren't particularly gifted in any one particular thing. So those people will exist. Nothing we can do can change that. The question is, in our modern culture, we see that there is a competition between these 4 groups of people. That one group says, we are the best, and we will do whatever we can to push the others down. And they say, no, we're the best, we'll push you out of the way. And so this is called class struggle. And this exists in our modern world. But these different occupational orders, as we were saying a minute ago, are based on not one's birth, who your father and mother were, but they're based on your guna and karma, your qualities and your work. So Bhagavad Gita endorses the Varnashram system, but not the caste system of modern India, because modern India generally has misrepresented the Varnashram system as a caste system, which even in older times, Lord Chaitanya and even before that, devotees were against the oppressive caste system, which is based totally on birth. So we don't support that. However, there is a division of occupations, and that division is based on qualifications. Questions? Okay, good. So the last bit that I want to talk about in this segment is about Dharma, which is a term that people band about, just like we talk about, when people come to Bhagavad Gita, when they study anything about India, especially the literature or traditions of ancient India, when they do those things, they have all these misconceptions. They may think of the caste system. How can if Bhagavad Gita supports the caste system, how can that book be taken seriously? What about merging with the Supreme? What is actually Hinduism? What does the Hindu believe? All these things we've been talking about are stumbling blocks or misconceptions that people have. Now, a word that gets thrown around is dharma. Also, karma does as well. But people do have a kind of a rough concept of karma. And that means that whatever work you do, if it's harmful or if it's abusive to other people, then you will experience that back. And similarly, sometimes people know the flip side of that, that if you do things that are helpful or useful to other people, then in a positive way, that karma will come back to you. So people usually have that concept fairly straightforward in their minds. Dharma is a more slippery concept. And so Dharma means technically serving the Supreme Lord. What I want to point to is number 4 here, that there is a difference between Sanatan Dharma and Jati Dharma. So Sanatan Dharma is the eternal duty of us as human beings on the face of the earth. Whereas Jati Dharma is the duty we may have given to us as according to the role we play in society. Are we a teacher? Are we administrator? Are we a entrepreneur or a farmer or something like that? So jati dharma is detailed duties that are incumbent on a person who is in one of the orders of life, And Sanatana Dharma is duty for everybody, and it's different. Sometimes, as Prabhupada says, Sanatana Dharma and your everyday duties, they're running in parallel, and sometimes they can go in opposite directions. In that case, Sanatana Dharma is more important because we can fulfill all of our various obligations to our society, to our friends, to our culture, to our government, and fail the grade on Sanatana Dharma. But if we succeed in Sanatana Dharma, but we don't quite manage to pull off everything necessary for our proper carrying out of our various dharmic duties, we will be considered to be successful. So if we succeed in Sanatana Dharma and fail to some extent in Jati Dharma, no problem. If we succeed in Jati Dharma and we fail in Sanatana Dharma, our whole life is useless. And essentially, that means we will take birth again. We have not learned anything. We have not really made any progress. Of course, this basic concept is here because Dharma means religion. It means working free from attachments. It means avoiding sinful reactions. It means essentially serving the Supreme Lord. So if we do that, then we have done the right thing. That is what Dharma is actually supposed to be about. It's about serving the Supreme Lord. So as a final note here, I will touch on another important misconception. We've seen that when people approach the Bhagavad Gita or they approach Vedic literature, they have these misconceptions. What about the caste system? What about many gods? What about this one Brahman? What is Hinduism exactly? And sometimes people say that the Vedic system is not compassionate because people will say, why should I help someone? It's their karma. And in fact, there are people in India who do say this kind of thing. And they write off their, indifference and the lack of charity as just acknowledging that, some people have good karma, some have bad karma. You're poor, all right, so that's your lot. I'm not going to help you. I don't think that you have anything that you have earned your situation, and therefore I'm not going to change you. So this is an improper understanding of Dharma, and it's an improper understanding of karma. So people indeed do have karma, and therefore we understand it is true that a person who is in a good position, in a advantageous position, a wealthy position, in a good family, in a prosperous region, they have good karma. That's true. But it's not that we're indifferent. Rather, we want to do what's best, which is to help them, not necessarily by improving their material lot, by giving them money or medical attention or some kind of housing. And indeed, that might be a part of the whole picture. But really, what we want to do is change their karma. And anyone can change their karma by taking up Dharma, which is what we say is Sanatana Dharma. It's just the process of serving the Supreme Lord. If someone serves the Supreme Lord, automatically their karma will improve. Otherwise, we can give them handouts, money, we can give them relief, support, medical attention, free housing, all these kind of things. But their lot will not improve because their karma has not improved. So That's the last bit. Any question there about that particular group of things? Okay, good. So I